Chapter 38. It came the second week of July. It had been a hot day, so we had kept the windows wide open and the blackout down. For once, I'd fallen into a sound, dreamless sleep. Whoop, 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 whoop. The sirens at the airfield wailed louder and louder. You'd have thought one was in our bedroom. Jamie jumped up, scrambling to keep hold of Bovril, who thrashed and scratched in an effort to get free. I grabbed my crutches. Susan came flying in, her dressing gown flapping. "Hurry, hurry," she said. "I can't hurry. Going downstairs took time. My hands shook. I wouldn't be fast enough. I would be bombed." Jamie ran ahead, but Susan waited for me. "It's all right," she said. "Don't panic." Across the living room, out the back door, Jamie ducked into the Anderson shelter and stuffed Bovril into his basket. The cat howled. He sounded like a baby screaming in pain. I stood at the door of the shelter. I'd never yet gone inside. I hated it. It scared me. It was so much like the cabinet under the sink at home, the one with the roaches. I could never see them or stop them. "Ada," Susan said behind me, "move!" I couldn't do it. I couldn't go inside, not into the damp shelter that smelled exactly like the cabinet, not into that darkness, not into that pain. The siren wailed. Jamie shouted, "Ada, hurry!" A noise like the plane exploding. Bombs, real bombs, here in Kent. German bombs everyone feared, here in the cabinet under the sink. Susan picked me up and carried me down the stairs. The smell enveloped me. I could feel the cramped cabinet, the roaches. I could hear Ma'am laughing while I screamed. I screamed. Another bomb, more screams. From Jamie? From me? How would I know? The memory of the cabinet seemed real, seemed to be happening right at that moment. I could see the cabinet, feel myself being shoved inside. Terror enveloped my brain. Suddenly I felt something tight around me, a blanket, a rough wool blanket. Susan wrapped me in it the way she had on Christmas Eve, tight, round and round. "Shh," she said, "shh." She put her arms around me and laid me on a bench and then half sat on me, squishing me between her backside and the shelter wall. "We're all here. We're safe," she said. She took Jamie onto her lap. "It's okay, Jamie. She's just frightened. It's okay." Jamie whimpered. "We're safe," Susan said. "It's okay." The pressure of the blanket soothed me. Gradually, I came back to the shelter, to Jamie and Susan. I stopped screaming. My heart didn't pound so hard. I breathed the smell of the wool blanket, wet from my tears, instead of the shelter cabinet dampness. From outside, we heard another blast, farther away, and the ack-ack from the anti-aircraft guns at the airfield. "We're okay," Susan said wearily. "We're okay." When the all-clear sounded 2 hours later, Susan and I were still wide awake. Jamie had fallen asleep on Susan's lap. She carried him back to the house. I walked beside her, trailing the blanket like a cape. We lay down in the living room, too worn out to climb the stairs. Late the next morning, when we woke, Susan said, "Ada, there will be more bombs. We will have to go into the shelter. You'd better get used to it." I shuddered. I couldn't imagine doing that again. "What set you off?" Susan asked. "Ma'am's cabinet. The way it smells." I made myself go somewhere else in my head fast before panic overwhelmed me. Butter. I imagined writing butter. Susan tapped my chin. "We can change the smell." She went to the market and bought aromatic herbs, rosemary, lavender, and sage. She hung them in the shelter upside down from the edges of the branches, and their smell filled the little room even after they were crumbly and dry. I couldn't smell the dampness anymore. It helped. I still panicked. Susan still always wrapped me in a blanket. but usually I could keep from screaming, and I didn't actually see the cabinet in my head. It was still awful, but I didn't frighten Jamie. That was important, because we went into the shelter nearly every night from that first time. The Battle of Britain had begun. Hitler had figured out he couldn't land his invading army until he'd conquered the Royal Air Force. Otherwise, our planes would bomb his ships and troops while they were landing. Once he'd gotten rid of our planes, invading England would be easy. The Germans had a lot more airplanes and pilots than the British did. They had different kinds of planes, though, and their fighter planes had shorter ranges than ours. This meant that they could only reach the southeastern corner of England before they had to turn back for more fuel. They could only shoot our planes and bomb our airfields in Kent. The airfields were their main target. Every plane they deployed, whether in the air or parked on the ground, brought them one step closer to invasion. Every one runway they destroyed gave our pilots one less place to safely land. Our airfield was hit that very first day. The bombs ripped through 2 storage sheds and left craters the size of small tanks in the grass runways. Fortunately, all the air crews found shelter. Once the all clear sounded, the crews worked through the night, shoveling debris into the blast holes. By morning, planes could safely land again. It was July, and the world was green and lovely. I rode Butter through fields of waving grass, up our hill to where I could see the blue sea glittering in the bright sunlight. Wild roses grew in the hedgerows, and the air felt heavy with their scent. The breeze blew, and I could feel perfectly happy, except that now I always watched for planes as well as spies. They hadn't come in daytime yet, but I knew they could. Susan didn't like me riding out, but she didn't want to forbid it either. Our home was so close to the airfield. I figured I was safer farther away. When I said so, she looked grim. "I should send you away," she said. It was hard enough to cope with Susan. How would I ever cope without her? What if we got sent back home? I stared at the tips of my shoes. I couldn't leave Butter, I said. Susan sighed. "You survived without a pony in London." I lifted my gaze to look at her. I had survived. Maybe. Could I do it again? Back in that one room? I hadn't known all I was missing. "I know," Susan said softly. "It's why I'm keeping you here." "There's things worse than bombs," I said, remembering what I'd heard her say before. "I think so," Susan said. "And Kent's a big place. They can't bomb every inch of it." But she looked out the window toward the airfield, and her eyes creased with worry.